Good evening. Well, I've actually just come from that meeting. It only wrapped up about 10-15 minutes ago. And when we're talking about the 2+2 meeting, it's first of all important to acknowledge the landmark deals that have been signed earlier this year between the two countries. One of them is the Reciprocal Access Agreement, and that'll allow Japanese troops to be stationed in Australia for joint training, for missions, for anything responding to emergencies there, and of course Australian troops to be stationed here in Japan. And we're the first country to have such a deal signed with Japan outside the United States. So that's one. The other was, of course, a joint kind of defence agreement, strategic agreement between Prime Ministers Fumio Kishida and Anthony Albanese. That was really setting out a 10-year plan, acknowledging all the challenges between the two countries face in the region and a commitment to strengthen their defence ties. So on the base of those two landmark agreements, the 2+2 is really trying to find out what can be achieved in the short, medium and long term, really adding some meat to those bones that I've mentioned earlier. They are essentially a roadmap, and now it's time to actually make some of those announcements come to fruition. So one of the things we know they're looking at is F-35s, the fighter aircraft, and they're looking at getting F-35s from Japan to Australia. There wasn't an announcement today on that. In fact, the phrasing they've used that they're going to, quote, accelerate the consideration of having F-35s in Australia. Basically, they haven't reached a deal yet, but they're putting emphasis on trying to reach a deal. And then they do want Japan to be involved in exercise Talisman Sabre. That's the largest bilateral military exercise between the armies of the United States and Australia in the top end. Now, given all the closeness of Japan and Australia, one question put to Richard Marles this afternoon during a speech before the 2+2 was, we have AUKUS, which is the strategic collaboration between Australia, the United Kingdom and the US, and primarily they're focusing on building nuclear submarines for Australia, but they're looking at more defence technologies and advancing them more broadly. Well, the question was essentially, when will AUKUS turn into JAUKUS? When will Japan be added to this agreement? And Richard Marles said it's such a huge, ambitious agreement, this AUKUS deal, that really for now they need to get some deliverables, get some traction there, find out what is actually achievable before they're looking at expanding it. But he did say all three countries would be keen to include Japan when perhaps the time is right. Let's take a listen to what he said earlier today.
The first thing I want to say is it's not the totality, and it should not be read as the totality of our effort in terms of the cooperation that we engage in terms of working jointly with other countries on military capabilities. We want to do more of that with Japan. I mean, we see this as a really important emerging part of our relationship with Japan, and I know that Japan already does this with the United States and with the United Kingdom.
And James, what mention was there of China's growing assertiveness in the region and plans to address that?
Well, first of all, picking up from that speech that Richard Marles gave this afternoon, the Defence Minister, he of course acknowledged that China is embarking on its biggest military build-up since World War II, but crucially he said that this build-up is happening without transparency and without reassurance to the region. So we know that is obviously a concern to both countries here in the 2+2. Both defence ministers and foreign ministers spoke about this, including from Japan. We heard that they didn't want China, or any country rather, to, quote, unilaterally change the status quo in the East and South China Sea. That's really a not too subtle point at China's military build-up and threats to invade Taiwan there. The other thing, of course, is that Australia and Japan have both been very close in supporting Ukraine and criticising, condemning Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. Richard Marles did address a bit of that as well, and he said that while China's given assurances it hasn't provided weapons to Ukraine, he still wanted that country to go one step further and actually condemn the invasion of Ukraine. But ultimately they acknowledge China is the major trading partner of both Japan and Australia. So it is quite a complex dynamic here at play.
And James, how significant are these latest developments between Japan and Australia in the context of the two countries' historic relations?
Well, Defence Minister Richard Marles described Japan as indispensable. You've got 70 years here of economic and educational ties between the two, and now they're going leaps and bounds, it seems, to strengthen defence ties as well. And certainly in the meetings today and all the joint statements that you hear from both ministers, they're just full of praise for each other country as well. So really now the challenge is that both Japan and Australia have the United States as a major ally, and they've talked about trilateral exercises and collaboration. The challenge now is to ensure that the relationship between Australia and Japan stands on its own 2 feet, separate to the United States as well. And certainly it's safe to say that both countries, Japan and Australia, are in agreement about the importance of having the relationship stand on its own 2 feet.
James Oaten in Tokyo, thank you.